put a smile on your face when you're moving from place to place. Good morning, good morning, morning, good morning, morning.
Yes, welcome back to the morning show on Tobago Updates Television. I am Adanna Combie, and we do apologize for that short break in transmission. As I mentioned, we're speaking with Ambassador Nickocy Phillips, of course, to TT Youth Will Rise, and Vernisa Cruickshank, PRO to Unity of the Hope. We're speaking about an update. Actually, we're going to get that update from the trip to Switzerland and Sierra Leone, and the discussions had there in terms of diplomatic bilateral agreements that were made. Good morning and welcome.
Listen, good morning to you again. Hope the glitches now.
We're always so happy to have you on our program. Of course, we know that you are diligent as it relates to things in Tobago, the development and progress of Tobago and its people. And so now we're talking about this trip to Switzerland and Sierra Leone. We had conversations before while you were there, and we kind of saw what you were doing. And now we're talking about diplomatic bilateral agreements. So tell us a little bit more about the trip, what came out of it, the discussions you had, and how it has now positioned Tobago in terms of partnering with other countries and NGOs as we move forward, as we progress and develop our country, our island.
First of all, good morning again, Trinidad and Tobago. The Switzerland trip, in regards to that, Irama had offered the THA a hand to come in to speak, because in the Switzerland trip, there was a pre-caucus about the minority voices. And I will let Ms. Cruickshank speak onto that, because I let her take over the conversations and the training as it relates to the youth and the young people in that perspective, and then I would have took over in regards to the caucus and in regards to minority voices, which I will share all later. So I'll hand it over to Ms. Cruickshank so she could talk about the sessions that she had in regards to the youth and the NGO system.
Yes, so basically the conference was really based on shaping the future and amplifying minority voices. This was the Switzerland minister, one of the ministers there, and she invited Nickocy to go. And I was able to replace her. The interest of having the minority voices in the world, so to speak, she took the initiative, which was very brave. Her name is Miss Yvonne. And her approach to it was that when the UN speaks, or the governments of the world speaks on behalf of the world, they oftentimes disregard the minority voices in their country. Oftentimes, it's always the agendas pertaining to economics and trade and those relationships, as opposed to the disparities that is happening within their communities on the grassroots. So she took the opportunity to invite NGOs as well as political leaders, traditional leaders from all over the world, from Africa, from Brazil, I happen to be from Trinidad and Tobago. There were people from different African countries, a lot of traditional leaders, different kingdoms from African countries that you otherwise would not have known that they do have an input in global development. And that was the approach, and that was the discussion. So she targeted youths. We had a youth discussion where there were NGOs from different places in the world. The United States had different organizations that are all around the world, as well as in relations to the UN, as well. The UN really just hosted for the conference, but most of the countries had NGOs that you never heard about. Some we knew, like the Boy Scouts and stuff like that, but it was an opportunity for us to dialogue and network and see where solutions could be offered to the UN when the summit comes up in September. So they did a black paper, which is basically all the recommendations, all the cases, all the case studies that they have done to make our initiative progress.
So what are some of the conversations that you had in this forum with all these NGOs and all these groups that represent young people, and as you said, the minority groups, specifically in your case, the youth? What are some of the conversations that you had and the recommendations? Not primarily just you, but what were the conversations and some of the recommendations put forward to the UN in terms of dealing with these particular minority groups?
Well, from some of them, it had leadership qualities that they said, in every society, we often disregard the youth's input in making major decisions. They oftentimes have to wait until they are in positions of power way beyond their years, and they tend to forget that spirited innovative way that and energy that youths have. That was one of the things I put forward, that policies should be made for companies, even simple companies. They can institute where there's a youth leadership process to taking over companies, to being able to train them within whatever field they're dealing with. That was one of the initiatives. There was the girl from London. She's the youngest judo champion. Her name is Anaya. She has been training people within her field, even though when she became champion, there was no cameras on her. Nobody knew who she was. Her mother went to BBC when they did the whole thing. She took that opportunity as a platform to make sure younger girls are able to. So she recommended, once I open the door, everyone come after me must be able to see that and teach that and have that principle instituted within her own field. And that was one of the things that came out of the youth discussion. Another one was traditional leaders, the dialogue between traditional leaders or government, the way in which they have conversations with us. They didn't know that the way they bring across information, a lot of youths don't know why they do what they do. So given that dialogue oftentimes is what was missing, that we don't know why principles are in place, we don't know why policies are instituted, and when we challenge that, we often get a feedback that, well, you're youths and you shouldn't ask us questions. So we kind of break down a lot of barriers in the traditional leaders and the government understanding that the dynamics and the welcoming of youths' voices and having that conversation.
And how confident do you feel, or how do you feel in terms of, having the opportunity to have your voice heard and your contribution made in that type of space? Not to mention the network of people that you were able to meet and to hear what their challenges are. How confident are you that your voice or your voices were heard, and that some sort of action will be taken in terms of providing the measure of support to change policies that impact this particular group of people?
Well, I'm a mental health nurse first, so I people all day. So when I apply the way in which they communicated about the discussions, peace, global development, inputs like that, oftentimes it's in a white room when nobody has context of how the person who they're affecting, they're really far removed from it. So me in that specific space, I got the opportunity to bring it to them in the human perspective. I left there with them calling me a human engineer, because from everybody you talk to, you have to bring it to the human perspective of how it really affects people, calling the truths for what it is, saying exactly what we're dealing with at the end of the day and what has been done reflectively, what is in place, and what we're planning for the future. So oftentimes that is the approach I took, and it did shift the narrative, because they didn't have anybody who was who lives in the average world, who they know their experience and be able to communicate that. So I related it from the human perspective of everybody. So that was the approach I took, and the relationships built now, it has a more family-oriented way about their approach now, because that was not introduced. It was missed due to the political, technical versions of the discussion. So I kind of bring it grassroots for them to be able to remember who they're talking about.
Right. So, and I do look forward to continue discussions and conversations with you as this continues to roll, because I know you have the conversation now and things will not be implemented immediately. So it takes time. So we will continue following up to see how this rolls out. And now we want to talk, Nickocy, about your involvement in the conferences and the type of conversations you had as it relates to these diplomatic bilateral agreements.
Well, we still have ongoing conversations, because we're looking at what my stance is, especially for unity of the people now. At least we're now signed on to the Black Paper movement. I think she left out that part where in September, the conference will be going, that decision that we made as a team in Switzerland, it's going to be based on a Black Paper that we're going to submit to the United Nations at the at the summit convention in September.
It had been submitted Sunday gone.
Oh yeah, it has been submitted Sunday gone. So in September we'll be going to hear what are the approvals or disapprovals of what we submitted. Conversations are still being had in regards to how do we now work with Switzerland and the young people and the NGOs, because bilateral conversations in that forum would go towards the government and the Tobago House of Assembly, which nobody was there. But at the end of the day, I am looking forward to bringing the development for the people and the young people and the NGOs of Trinidad and Tobago. As we move from that discussion day, as I said, things are still taking place. I don't want to preempt anything until we sign off on everything, but it's whatever we get towards is towards youth development, it's what's cultural exchange, and it's also looking at the economic growth, and we're going to be bringing them here for the October Carnival, especially our Cornucopia show. And for the following year, we are going to host, I think it's my time to host one of the NGO conference or summits in Trinidad and Tobago. So for next year, a lot of people are going to be coming from different NGOs around the world, and that's one of the biggest tasks I think I will be ever undertaken in Trinidad and Tobago at this point in time. As we move to Sierra Leone now, to Sierra Leone, when I met with the minister, I would have spoke to her at one of the conferences in the UN, and from there, an invitation came into effect one time. And you can see some of the pictures there is one of the some of the things. The Sierra Leone trip was an invitation to, they had their second edition of the National Youth Innovative and Transformative Cultural Festival. And while we were there, the conversations we had, we bilateral conversations, would deal with the increased awareness and appreciation of the innovative and cultural contribution of young people. We did a preach peace and a campaign against the use of drugs abuse in that presently disturbing the youth in society. And we're also looking at, right now we're having a discussion. I spoke to her this morning just before I come. We are continuing the conversation on a cultural bilateral agreement and partnership whereby we can mix the two different cultures together in terms of dance, in terms of their cultural background and what they have and what we have here in Trinidad and Tobago, because they really wanted the pan. It was a short notice thing, and they wanted to know what the pan was, they wanted to know what our culture was, and that is the conversation we're having now with the Minister of Sierra Leone. She's also the person in charge of the youth tourism in collaboration with Psychology of Winning and the government of Sierra Leone. So we are having conversations, and you can see somebody dance move. They really want to come. So in October, when they come here, I think we're going to sign on the final agreement of what our conversation is about. Everything that we're doing and everything that I'm doing is geared towards youth development on the island of Tobago, especially Trinidad as well. It's also geared towards the NGOs. The NGOs of Trinidad and Tobago, they have to come out of this political realm. They have to come out of the norm of just doing things within Trinidad and Tobago. Out there are opportunities, and this is what I'm trying to bring here to opportunities. Last week we had a meeting. We are expanding the horizon of Trinidad and Tobago Youth Will Rise. We have an internal election on the 10th of June, whereby all the positions are up for grabs, especially mine as ambassador. I'm giving the opportunity to young people now to take over. What I want to do now is to focus on the politics, but also give them an opportunity now to go and see the world. Because as of this year and next year, we will be going on a lot of trips. And we know people coming just to get a visa or just to come and go on the trips. It's not going to happen. So the conversations that we're having is to strengthening access and funding opportunities to NGOs and working towards eliminating GBVF.
Right. So I know you spoke a mouthful there in terms of conversations and agreements and signing off and bringing people in. What role, and I know you mentioned it's not about politics, but what role does the government, whether it is the THA or whether it is the government of Trinidad and Tobago, what role do they have in terms of signing off these agreements and bringing in, because you're talking about ministers, so you're talking about persons in high offices in other countries coming into our country. How does that marry in terms of how does that work? What is their role?
Well,
in
what
it?
I'm doing so far, respectively, I've written a report so far and submitted to the Ministry of Tourism, and also have to submit a report to the Ministry of Gender Affairs in the Office of the Prime Minister. And in that report, I will be doing all the conversations that I be had with the ministers and different conversations of bilateral conversation that relates to youth and how they can be involved in it and what steps they can guide us along. Because as I said, what I'm trying trying to do is to empower the youths in a different frame. But we can't just wait until we empower or we're waiting until you're getting there. As we said, as Vernisa said, the conversations that normally governments take is about economic growth and business, and it's not really a conversation about young people. So I'm taking the opportunity now as I get it to have these conversations and then see what I can do, and then ask and introduce it to the government to see how they can also think. So I have a great relationship with the government, especially in terms of tourism and the community development and the gender affairs. So as I said, when we are finished having the discussion, we are going to submit an even bigger report to them to ask them how can they collaborate with us and how can the government step in and give us legal advice as to how these collaborations and these bilateral agreements can come into effect, not only for Trinidad and Tobago, but for the development of the youths of Trinidad and Tobago, especially Tobago, because I really want to push Tobago to a level where right now we're lost. And I want to bring Tobago back. And as I said, you don't need to be chief secretary. You don't need to be in government. We have to take the opportunity now as young people, as young leaders, to start to do things for our country. You don't have to sit and wait until somebody say, okay, well, when we elect you, you'll be able to do this. No. And this is what I'm doing now, shaping the narrative that Trinidad and Tobago can become something once we open our doors to different conversations and different people representing the interests of our young people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you so much for that wealth of information and, of course, the discussions that are happening there. And I do hope, I wish you the very best of success. And, of course, I do hope that you get to have those meaningful conversations right here in Trinidad and Tobago with the primary stakeholders, which is the government, of course, and the Tobago House of Assembly, and see how best we can move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been speaking with Nickocy Phillips, the ambassador to TT Youths Will Rise, and also Vernisa Cruickshank, PRO to Unity of the People, as they speak about those trips that took place to Switzerland and Sierra Leone and the discussions had, hoping that they can be implemented in our space for the betterment of all of us right here in Tobago. And this is where we end the morning show on Tobago Updates Television, but we don't end our programming here. We head on over to Tobago Notes and then onto GMT. So stay with us. And as you stay with us, of course, we invite you to help us share the live, share the live, share the live.